Hi, I'm Emily Forrest, and going along with our theme of copyright infringement this week, I will be talking about Three Boys Music Corporation versus Bolton. The parties involved in this case are the plaintiff, which is the Three Boys Music Corporation. This company is the copyright holder of the Isley Brothers song called Love is a Wonderful Thing, which is a central part of this case. The Isley Brothers were one of America's most well-known rhythm and blues groups. They helped define the soul sound of the 1960s with popular songs such as Shout, Twist and Shout, and This Old Heart of Mine. Michael Bolton is one of the defendants of this case. He is a singer who gained popularity in the late 1980s and early 1990s by reviving the soul sound of the 1960s. Bolton has orchestrated the soul music revival by covering old songs such as Percy Sledge's When a Man Loves a Woman and Otis Redding's Sittin' on the Dock of the Bay. He has also written several of his own hit songs, and the other defendant, Andrew Goldmark, was Bolton's co-writer for a part of his career. So some background information of the case. The Isley Brothers released a song titled Love is a Wonderful Thing in 1966. The song never made top charts, but it was played by radio networks in Connecticut during that same year. Michael Bolton and Andrew Goldmark grew up in Connecticut in 1966 and were fans of soul music at a young age. In early 1990, Bolton and Goldmark wrote a song called Love is a Wonderful Thing. Bolton released it as a single in April 1991 as part of his album Time, Love, and Tenderness. Bolton's Love is a Wonderful Thing finished at number 49 on Billboard's year-end pop charts. Going into the facts of the case, the copyright holder of the Isley Brothers song Three Boys Musical Corporation, Music Corporation, sorry, they sued Bolton, Goldmark, and their record companies for infringement. The district court found Bolton's song strikingly similar to the Isley Brothers song and held the defendants liable for infringement. Then the Three Boys Music Corporation was awarded $5.4 million in the jury trial, and after that, Bolton and Goldmark appealed the decision. So before I get into more of the facts of the case, I just wanted to talk a little bit about how a copyright infringement case works. So in order to make a successful copyright infringement case, the plaintiff has to prove two things. First, that they have ownership of the copyright, and the second part is proving that the infringement did in fact occur. To prove that the work was infringed, there must be evidence that the defendant had reasonable access to the plaintiff's work and that there was substantial similarity between the two works. Once the plaintiff has shown access to the work and substantial similarity, the burden of proof then shifts to the defendant to prove the infringing work was independently created. Before we get into more of the facts of the case, I just wanted to talk briefly about how a copyright infringement case works. So, in order to make a successful copyright infringement case, the plaintiff has to prove two things. First, that they have ownership of the copyright, and second, that the infringement did in fact occur. To prove that the work was infringed, there must be evidence that the defendant had reasonable access to the plaintiff's work and that there was substantial similarity between the two works. Once the plaintiff has shown access and substantial similarity, the burden of proof shifts to the defendant to prove the infringing work was independently created. According to the court, access means that the creator of the allegedly infringing work has a reasonable opportunity to hear the infringed work. So that means that a finding of access cannot be based purely on speculation and conjecture, and that a bare possibility of access will not suffice for an infringement court case. Evidence of access can be shown through a direct link between the artists or by showing the protected work was widely available and that a defendant was likely to have heard it at the time it was widely available. The court ruling for this case used the inverse ratio rule, which requires a lower standard of proof of substantial similarity when a high degree of access is shown. And similarly, if there is not enough evidence of access, the copyright plaintiff can still make out a case of infringement by showing that the songs were strikingly similar. This was helpful, particularly in this case, because, as I'll discuss later, the proof of access was weaker than the substantial similarity, so it could be overruled by that imbalance, which was helpful for the court decision. Going into testing for substantial similarity, there are elements of a song that are unprotected by copyright. These include the tempo, any non-consecutive notes, short phrases, and the overall structure and chord progressions within a song. However, a combination of these elements could make a work substantially similar, and we'll get into that later on in this presentation as well. So determining similarity requires a two-part test. One is intrinsic and one is extrinsic. The extrinsic test requires that the plaintiff identify concrete elements based on objective criteria, and it requires an analytical dissection of a work. The intrinsic test is a subjective test that asks whether the ordinary reasonable person would find the works to be substantially similar. So this means if a general listener decides that two works are very similar to each other, that's a good indication that that there is a substantial similarity. So going back to our case, the issue presented to the court was whether or not the district court's verdict is supported by substantial evidence, and whether reasonable minds could find that the defendant had a reasonable opportunity to have heard the plaintiff's song before they created their own song. The court held that yes, infringement of a copyrighted musical work was shown through substantial evidence of access and substantial similarities between the works. Bolton and Goldmark argued that there was insufficient evidence of substantial similarity because the Isley Brothers' expert musicologist, Dr. Gerald Eskelin, failed to show that there was a copying of a combination of unprotectable elements. The court ruling proved the contrary. The court found evidence of reasonable access when they determined that the Isley song was on local radio stations for several weeks during a time when Bolton and Goldmark regularly listened to soul music. They also found evidence of access when 3 disc jockeys testified that the Isley Brothers song was widely disseminated and available on radio and television stations in Connecticut, ironically where Bolton and Goldmark grew up. Lastly, Bolton confessed to being a huge fan of the Isley Brothers and an avid collector of their music, which provides another reasonable evidence of access. Although this is a weak proof of access, by applying the inverse ratio rule, that can be overlooked by the substantial similarity between the two works. When determining similarity, the jury found that the songs were substantially similar in 5 unprotected areas, those being the title hook phrase, the shifted cadence, the instrumental figures, the verse and chorus relationship, and the fade ending. So, contrary to Bolton's argument, the jury found infringement based on a unique compilation of those elements. An example of the similarity in the hook phrase can be seen below. This picture shows an 86% similarity between the two songs. The Isley version is on the top bar and Bolton's version is on the bottom. And as you can see, there is plenty of similarity between these two songs, and this is only one line and the most popular line of the song. If you listen to these versions on YouTube, the glaring similarity between the two becomes even more clear. After the court found reasonable evidence of access and substantial similarity, they moved on to determine whether the song was independently created by Bolton. And they found that Bolton and Goldmark failed to show that the song was independently created based on 2 concrete factors. The first factor was the work tape that demonstrated how Bolton and Goldmark created their song. The tape revealed evidence that Bolton may have subconsciously copied a song that he believed to be written by Marvin Gaye. Um, and even though Bolton subconsciously may have copied the song, it's still liable as infringement in the court's eyes. The second factor was the testimony that their arranger, Walter Afanasieff, contributed 2 of the 5 unprotectable elements that they allegedly copied. So in the disposition of this case, the district court heard all of the evidence of the case, instructed the jury on the applicable law, but refused to reverse the jury's verdict. Having found that the law was properly applied to this case, the district court's decisions and the jury's credibility determinations were affirmed. And that concludes my presentation of this case. I hope you enjoyed. Thank you.